In this video, we're going to talk about the early Republican Roman way of training horses, cavalry horses, some of it bitless. If you like it, thumb it up, please. Subscribe. There's a thank you button below. If you can send us a few bucks to help us make more content, that would be great. Welcome back, rockers and fellow horse nerds. I've got Dr. Phil back with me, our eminent Professor Emeritus from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London University and assorted other universities. And he's also a horse nerd, just like us. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the Roman period. Okay, and Rome is divided really into two historical periods militarily, for want of a better way to organize things. You've got a Republican phase where Rome's on the rise and is coming into contact with a bunch of other entities and peoples, and is not only just stomping them, but it's also adopting a lot of stuff from them. And then you've got a later phase where Rome is sort of going through its Elvis bloated, dead on a toilet type, phase, and it takes it a while to sort of shudder to a halt. And then that goes into the early medieval period, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff that happens with horses then as well. In fact, they sort of lose out to the horse, you could really say. So we're going to do a two-part series. We're going to do one on the early bit, one on the second bit. Before we dive into the Romans, let's talk about who are the Romans getting their horse stuff from? Because Italy itself in the ancient world isn't a terribly horsey place. In fact, a lot of the Mediterranean isn't really, because a lot of the Mediterranean is kind of mountains to the sea. So it's foot soldiers, ponies maybe, and ships. However, there are some exceptions to this, and one of them, which we're going to be talking about, is of course over in the west in what's now Portugal and Spain, what they then called Iberia and Lusitania, and that's where we get the origins of our amazing Iberian horses. And the other one, of course, is North Africa, where we're going to be looking at Carthaginians and barb horses and things like this. And Professor Wirtz here happens to be the owner of a barb horse and can talk about this at length. Okay. So how does the Mediterranean world end up with horses in the first place? Let's just do a very general, sort of massively generalized history. If we can accept that horse domestication happens out on the steppe areas of the big flat grasslands that go from Eastern Europe across to more or less Beijing, we seem to agree that you get these three cultures that have been identified, the Botai, the Yamnaya, and the Sintashta, who seem to be domesticating horses and then riding them and then making them into warfare things for chariots, and then exporting this down to the cities of Mesopotamia, the Hittite kings, who then institutionalize it for their military. And then at the same time, mounted archery begins to come in, and this becomes cavalry, not just chariots. And by the time the Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks, in the late Bronze Age are coming into contact with the Anatolian and sort of Persian Empire, which have inherited all this steppe stuff and have now put a big old military stamp on it, they go, ooh, that's kind of good, I think we'll do that as well. And so they adopt it. But of course, anytime you adopt something, anytime you import something, it's expensive, right? You've got it. This is not for everybody. So where you had tribes on the steppe where everyone's got a horse, because everyone's got 300 horses, because horses are just what's going on up there. By the time you get to a place where you've got to import it as something exotic, like Athens or Sparta, then it's going to be reserved for the aristocracy. And that is where we indeed get this whole idea of the mounted man being a person of great rank and prestige and so forth. So, of course, the Greeks have their adventure with this, and we'll be doing their own videos on that. I'm talking about Xenophon and these people. But by the time we get to the early Romans, who start to kick butt all over the Mediterranean, including taking Greece under their wing, the horse thing as an aristocratic thing has now become somewhat entrenched through the city-states of the Mediterranean. And that is, I think, where we should begin.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, so over to you.
And we're beginning, just to put it in context and for people to hang up their coat hook in a way, that is around the time when Alexander the Great goes rampaging east towards India. That is when Rome turns from a very backward little Italian city-state, of which there were many, into something bigger by gobbling up the others.
Bunch of bandits, actually, originally. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all sorts of wonderful myths about how Rome came to be. One of the myth makers I'm going to mention in a minute. Horse-wise, we've already said Italy is in a very similar position than Greece. Lots of mountains, rocky slopes, poor mountain pasture. There are indigenous horse breeds in Italy today, most of them critically endangered, like a pony called the Bardigiano. And they are horses kept by people who can afford it, by the aristocracy. In Rome, you have the citizens of the city, actually very similar to ancient Greece, classed by how they can fight when they have to do military service. The ordinary citizens tend to fight on foot, very much in the way the Greeks fought, with a long lance, with a nice muscly thorax armor, and a sword and helmet on. And the aristocracy, the equestrians, the knights, they fight on horseback, and they're relatively few. We have an idea about how they may have trained myth-making. The Roman poet Virgil, who wrote a long epic about the rise of Rome called the Aeneid, he writes about something called the Lusus Troiae, the Trojan Games, in which the young men of the aristocracy would reenact scenes from mythology on horseback, which of course is a display of mounted prowess, but also a good exercise for warfare. And now when Rome starts to expand, the first place they expand to is northern Italy. So they gobble up some smaller city-states, they gobble up the Etruscans.
That's Tuscany.
Yeah, indeed. And they come to the valley of the Po River.
So up around the big flat bit on the top of Italy.
The top seam of the Italian boot. And which is by around 300 AD is inhabited by Celtic people. And they bring their horses. And
the Celts bring their horses.
The Celts bring their horses, indeed. And the other, actually,
see our previous videos on Epona, Celtic horse goddess.
I was about to say, when we were discussing Epona, we were talking about historical linguistics, which is a famously murky subject, but there are indications that the Latin word equus for horse and the Greek word hippos for horse may come from a Proto-Indo-European root or two roots around the lines of ek or ep. So there's a linguistic trace running through that. The other big place the Romans go to, because it's a very desirable place that everyone wants to have in the ancient Western Mediterranean, is Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula, where there is an old horse culture. The ancient Iberians, Lusitanians, Celto-Iberians.
Which are big river deltas, big flat, marshy, good horse grass growing areas, Guadalquivir River, Tagus River, valleys, yeah.
They are, in contrast to Italy, they are really good places to keep horses in the Iberian Peninsula. There's a horse culture there. We found a couple of inscriptions. The Iberians didn't write that much, but we found statues. There's a wonderful Iberian statue called the horse tamer, of a human figure in the middle who've got two horses by the halter. It's called the horse tamer. And there's, when we go on the circle, we meet Rome's big early arch enemy, that is Carthage.
And that is, you think Hannibal.
Yeah.
We think elephants when we think Carthage, because it's North African. We know that Hannibal took elephants. But what Hannibal is less known for is his amazing cavalry.
Indeed, because he also used Iberian cavalry, but he had a big reservoir of horse people in North Africa called the Numidians. And there's a bit of an interesting discussion, rabbit hole warning, how the horse came to Northern Africa, whether there was an old nexus of horse domestication in the Iberian Peninsula that then exported horses to North Africa, or whether they came east via ancient Egypt. Remember, in about...
West, you mean?
Yeah, west, sorry, from the west. I'm looking at it the wrong way around. From ancient Egypt westwards. If you remember, around 1500 BC, the ancient Egyptians adopted horses from
Mesopotamians.
From Mesopotamia, and they moved west. So that would be.
I should imagine rationally it's probably both, right?
Yeah.
If you've got good horses there and good horses there, and you're a powerful city-state there, why wouldn't you get from both, right?
It's plausible. Hasn't been really proven yet, but there are indications.
So just to recap, if you're trying to follow us here, we're starting in Rome, which is adopting a Greek model of just a few aristocratic dudes who can afford to have horses. And in fact, this becomes the Senate. You're not allowed to be a senator unless you are of the equestrian equite class, which means unless you own enough land.
Actually,
to keep horses.
The correct word is equitus. I've been saying it wrong all around.
Okay.
It's equitus.
So if you're of that class, which is, of course, relatively few, aristocracy is always a minority, you're going to have horses, and you're either going to be commanding a small cavalry squadron, or you're sitting up on your horse telling all the blokes on foot what to do. Then, as Phil says, the Romans expand. They encounter Celtic people who've got horses up in northern Italy. Remember, there is no Italy at this point. This is effectively a separate country. And they also go west in the Mediterranean and immediately encounter a big trade rival and therefore military rival. That's Carthage in what's now Tunisia. And these Carthaginians, they've got horses. Oh boy, do they have horses. All right, so Barb Rabbit Hole, please.
Barb Rabbit Hole, it's a bit difficult to connect the modern barb horse to the ancient Numidian horse. We've got depictions on rock paintings from the northern Sahara. We've got horses depicted on Carthaginian coins, and they show an oriental horse, so very lean, with sometimes with a dished face, sometimes with a straight face. The barb horses today tend to have either a very lightly dished or straight profile. Some have a ram's head, so you can get pretty much anything there. And the Numidians, they start to appear on a lot of depictions, even in the Roman times.
What's the difference between a Numidian and a Carthaginian?
Oh, good point. Numidians are taken to be the indigenous population.
Like the Berbers would be today.
Yeah. And they are, the Berbers, or as they call them themselves, the Amazigh, are the very likely descendant from the Numidians, not directly, but there's been all sorts of mixtures going in there. And the Numidians, they're not savages. They have states, they have kingdoms. There's actually one very famous Numidian king called Jugurtha, who fought the Romans after they started invading northern Africa.
Didn't go well for him, though.
Not really. But actually one descendant of the Numidian kings married the daughter of Cleopatra.
Ooh.
So there were also diplomatic connections all across the Mediterranean. And they fought, if I can go into the horsey bit of the Numidians, or do you want to
it's not I want to make a point, I just want to clear up the question before how they fought. That's who a Numidian. What's a Carthaginian?
Oh, the Carthaginian, terribly sorry, rabbit hole. Carthaginians were people who came from the east, from the Phoenician city-states in what's today Lebanon. And the Phoenicians were great sailors and traders, and they thought in around the year 700 BC, how about we don't go back and forth all the time, but we found colonies, and we start our own cities where the trade is. And so they started a couple of ones, and the most famous one right next where Tunis is today. The most famous one was called, in their language, Semitic language, Carthage, the new city, which in Latin obviously becomes Carthago.
So they, like the Romans, are empire builders. Yeah. And so if you're the Numidians, you're a bit like those Ibero-Celts when the Romans come in, or those Celts up in the Po Valley when the Romans come in. The Numidians would have been conquered people, presumably, or client states.
Conquered or allied.
Yeah. With the Carthaginians, because the Carthaginians show up with all that money and all that power and all that this and that, and the Numidians are there anyway. So, okay, they're going to do their thing together. All right.
Yeah. And it could have gone either way. Rome could have been the dominating power, or Carthage.
Right.
Our history could have gone, we could be speaking Phoenician.
Indeed, and boy did they fight it out. Yeah. So tell us how they fought, these Numidian cavalry.
The Romans were really amazed by how the Numidian cavalry fought, because they were used to horses that had bridles and bits, maybe even saddles already. There are plenty of depictions. Maybe we can...
Saddles, but not stirrups.
Yeah.
A saddle that has got built-up bits to help you not fall off in combat, but no stirrups yet. Yeah.
And the Numidians had silch. So all the Roman authors, like, for instance, Pliny, the great proto-naturalist, and the people like Livy who write histories, or Polybius who write histories of the wars of the Romans with the Carthaginians, they all mention that the Numidian horses were infrenate, unbridled or unreined. Phrenos means rein. And so they rode their horses
Bridleless.
Bridleless with and some say with a rope around the neck, like a neck rope or a neck ring, and without saddles, and that they would, when they stopped, they would dismount and their horses would stand there until called for. So they must have been really well trained, so that the riders could steer them with weight aids alone, or sometimes with putting their spear or javelin to the side of the horse's neck. That's also being mentioned. And then when they dismounted and the horses were put somewhere, the horses would stay. So that is something that the Romans really noticed.
So what we're talking about here is a kind of light cavalry, not a heavy cavalry. So a light cavalry means you don't directly engage with the enemy. You either ride circles around them, chucking things at them or firing things at them, and then you get away very fast. Or you dismount, like mounted infantry effectively, and then fight on foot and then get back on your horse and run away. So it's just before you start to put into your mind a picture of people doing collected work with hand-to-hand combat, spinning and doing all that three-dimensional stuff that we associate with hand-to-hand cavalry, that does actually require the bridle. And the Romans had got some experience with this because, of course, they'd gotten their horsemanship perhaps through the Greek states, who'd gotten their stuff from the Persians, who were indeed had that kind of heavy, close engagement cavalry with the bridle, and also the light cavalry that just rode around people, and were also scouts, and skirmishers, so that if you could disorder your enemy's infantry and they started to run away, you could also send these blokes in after them to chop them up. But it's not collected work in place. No.
And another thing that the Numidians apparently did, which annoyed the Romans to no end, is that they would pretend to run away.
Oh, that's
and then turn around. The cavalry pretends to ride away. Infantry or heavy cavalry follows. Light cavalry turns around and showers them with pointy things.
Nothing to irritate a Roman like getting showered by pointy things by the people who are supposed to be running away. Because the Romans liked people to bounce obligingly when they kicked them. And this, of course, was not happening with these Numidians,
So it was a very logical idea for the Romans when they conquered northern Africa, when they kicked out the Carthaginians and finally, bit by bit, subdued the Numidian kingdoms.
And this went on over hundreds of years. This was not like a quick thing. Yeah.
And then to do like they had done in southern France, what's today southern France, what they did in Iberia, what they did in what's today southern Balkans, in Thrace. They did that in North Africa too. They took the local people with their horses into their service, and in that way acquired a cavalry.
Acquired a technology,
And the good thing, the benefit for someone from Numidia or from Thrace to serve in the Roman army was you get paid, you get food, something that may not be regularly forthcoming where you originally grew up. And at the end of your military service, you get Roman citizenship.
And perhaps a bit of land.
And actually, you could expect a bit of land and all the benefits that go with Roman citizenship.
So it was a tasty proposition, provided you survived. And a lot of these guys who ended up in first auxiliary and then regular Roman units from these other parts of the world often brought their families with them. So you could sort of have your tribe come with you. You wouldn't have to necessarily give up your traditional culture, and you might even bring your gods with you.
Indeed. And we got DNA evidence from Roman burials from as far as northern Britain, that there were people from all over the empire, really.
Tell us about that one down near Stuttgart. That was interesting.
Yeah, that was shout out to my friend Frederick Kirch, who is a historian working with the State Antiquities Service down in Baden-Württemberg, southwestern Germany. And near Stuttgart, in Bad Cannstatt, there was a large Roman army camp that housed large cavalry units. We can talk about the organization in a bit. And they found, while excavating that camp, they found a horse cemetery. Or I would call that a horse cemetery because the horses, they found horse skeletons, whole ones, not cut up to be cooked or made into glue or something, buried carefully. So the horses must have been valued. one horse even had grave goods with it, little pots and things like that. And so what the archaeologists are going to do is when they dug this up, there'll be a DNA analysis of the horses. So we can say some things about how humans moved around in the Roman Empire, and with that analysis we will be able to have some insight into where the horses came from, where they raised locally, where they imported, and that's going to be extremely exciting.
And not just bringing the livestock, but also the culture. So, for example, we know that Epona was the Celtic horse god, became adopted, you know, all through the Roman Empire by the military. But you mentioned in a previous conversation that we had a Numidian North African horse god as well. Tell us about that one.
That appears rather vaguely defined and not really with a name. In some inscriptions from Northern Africa, there's very little evidence, but there must have been, there are no inscriptions dedicated to Epona in Northern Africa, or none yet found, but sort of a Numidian god, and there's always just a couple of letters from his name surviving, so I wouldn't really even put a name on him. It's a as yet to be fully researched.
You did give it a name though in a previous conversation. You said Tanea.
That's a goddess. That's a Carthaginian goddess.
Carthaginian goddess. Yeah. All right.
So we have Numidian, some North African.
Yet North Africa.
Yeah, North African horse god who we can't really pin down, but probably male.
Okay.
And we've got a goddess, a Semitic, Middle Eastern goddess called Tanis.
Who is perhaps being exported into the Western Mediterranean from southern Syria or Libya.
Who comes with the Carthaginians into the Western Mediterranean. He's a
Tanis. She.
Yeah, she. Who's an important goddess with the Carthaginians, who appears on Carthaginian coins. So on one side of the coin you have her head, so a nice Greek-looking lady with a band around her hair, and on the other side of the coin you have a horse.
How do we spell her name?
T-H-A-N-I-S.
Tanis, perfect. I can feel another video coming on about Tanis. What I find interesting about that is that we know that early cavalry, in terms of organized military cavalry, seems to perhaps get a real push in the late Bronze Age in this area of Syria and southern Anatolia, which if you go to the coast there, you're basically at Lebanon. So I'm wondering if that's now taken by the Phoenicians who become Carthaginians. We got, you know, an early cavalry goddess from there, now a millennia or so on, because we think about the ancient world as like this one period, but it was thousands of years, and it's actually longer than the modern period. That she seems to then go through an evolution and becomes a North African thing. That's kind of interesting, right? Yeah.
It's quite so, because a lot of the things that the Carthaginians practiced in their religion, in their culture, that's definitely from the Middle East.
Okay, so I think what we want to do here is just quickly conclude. What we've got is a picture in this early Roman period of horses coming in to Rome itself, kind of through the Greek model, which was sort of an importation of the Persian model, which is not so much light cavalry, but more squadrons of cavalry that are perhaps going to engage directly or be skirmishers to flank infantry. And then they encounter these Celts up there in northern Italy, and they encounter these Ibero-Celts over there in what's now Spain and Portugal, and they go to war with the Carthaginians, who've got these very cool light riders who are doing their stuff bridleless, interesting, very much as skirmishers and mounted infantry. But this sets the stage for the next video, where we're going to talk about how these different technologies of cavalry get brought into the Roman Empire, institutionalized, and then how we inherit them.
Indeed.
All right.
Let's do that.
So thanks very much for watching, lads. We'll see you on the next one. If you like this, if it was interesting, please thumb it up, please subscribe. You know how that helps the algorithm to push this stuff forward and out there. There is a thank you button down below if you want to shoot us a few bucks to help us to make the time to make more of this content. If you also would like to learn how to train your horse in the classical way, in a way that their horse loves and you love, down below there's a free intro course. Click there. And of course, if you want to come and work with us and our horses actually in person, you can just go on that website where the free courses below, send us an email, we can make a plan and do that with you. So those are the plugs. See you on the next one. Stick around for what we've got about medieval and ancient world horse training. Lots of more good stuff to come.